I'm Bill Turner, the monthly program manager, and pleased to introduce our speaker tonight, Nathan Pieplow. Nathan's familiar to our regular attendees of the DFO monthly meetings through his many DFO presentations. Nathan spent his childhood in South Dakota, where he had an early fascination with birds, with a particular interest in bird sounds. He's a former editor of the quarterly journal Colorado Birds and is one of the developers of the Colorado County birding websites and the Colorado Birding Trail. He's the author of 2 volumes in the Peterson Field Guide series to birding sounds, with the Eastern volume published in 2017 and the Western one published in 2019. He's a popular speaker at birding festivals and other birding organizations. Nathan serves on the board of the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies and teaches writing and rhetoric at UC Boulder. Tonight, Nathan will be speaking on the provocative topic, the best bird songs you've never heard. Nathan, it's good to have you back for our program tonight.
So, welcome everybody. Once again, I have to give a shout out to DFO for inviting me back yet another time to give you yet another talk. I only develop new talks when DFO asks me to speak again. And you've asked me to speak so many times that I now have a large repertoire of talks that I can now go and give to other organizations. You are the hometown crowd. You are the guinea pigs. You always get first dibs on all my talks. And this is a brand new talk developed just for you and being given right now for the very first time ever. Maybe not the last time. If it's a little rough around the edges, I apologize. I also apologize if my voice sounds a little strange because I am a little under the weather today. And I am super glad that we're doing this on Zoom so that I don't have to actually come with maybe a little bit of mild symptoms into an actual space with you all. This is why we do it on Zoom. So tonight, we're going to talk about the best bird sounds you've never heard. I will give you a disclaimer up front. You may have in fact heard some of these bird sounds. So, if you've actually heard some of them, don't ask me for your money back. But I suspect many of you have not heard them, or at least you haven't heard them this way. This is a story that I'm going to tell you in 12 chapters tonight, or perhaps a better way to say it is I'm going to tell you 12 very short stories tonight, each about a different bird that you may not have heard before. And we're going to go from there. And yes, black vulture is one of the birds that's going to be featured in our talk tonight. And I see that Elena at least has heard them before, which is fantastic. So, with a title like The Best Bird Sounds You've Never Heard, we're going to start with the question, why have you not heard these bird sounds before? And if I were to ask people why they have not heard these particular bird sounds before, I get a variety of excuses. But here are the top 3 excuses why people might not have heard some of these bird sounds. Number 1 excuse, I sleep too late. We are going to hear a number of sounds tonight that are made in the middle of the night. So if you are a late riser, that's probably why you haven't heard them before. Number 2, I'm too far south. Some of the familiar birds that we have around here in migration or in winter make amazing sounds when they are far to the north of us on the breeding grounds. And yet we would never hear them if we only go birding here in Colorado. Familiar birds, unfamiliar sounds, because we are not near the breeding grounds for those species. So that's our second category of why people might not have heard some of these bird sounds before. And finally, my favorite excuse, I expected these sounds to be prettier, so I really didn't pay attention to them when I was hearing them. and I didn't really think of them as songs, or I really didn't think of them as worth paying attention to. And I'm here to tell you different tonight. So these are our top 3 excuses. I hope maybe some of them apply to you already. I hope none of them will apply to you after we're done with this talk. Because once you've heard some of these sounds, I hope you'll start to pick up on them when you're actually out and about in nature. Maybe you'll get up a little earlier. Maybe you'll book a trip farther north. Maybe you'll pay attention to some things happening right in your backyard that you just weren't paying attention to before. So, story number 1 is the tale of the automatic recording units. This falls under excuse number 1. I didn't get up early enough. This is a tale that was told to me by my friend Andy Boyce. Some of you may remember Andy. He lived in Colorado for a while, back when he was doing his graduate work at CU Boulder. He now is a biologist up on the American Prairie Reserve in Montana. And he does various kinds of work up there. And he wrote a grant, I think it was the summer before last, to put out automatic recording units to do surveys for black-billed and yellow-billed cuckoos. So if you don't know what black-billed cuckoos sound like, this is a song you may not have heard in Colorado. I myself heard it one time in Colorado. It's the only time I've ever encountered a black-billed cuckoo in Colorado. It sounds like this. About 17 years ago, there was a black-billed cuckoo on territory at Bonney Reservoir in Yuma County, and I was lucky enough to hear that bird. It wasn't that particular bird you just heard, but it was that kind of song. And then yellow-billed cuckoos, when they're actually singing territorial song, they sound like this. And that's a sound that probably some of you actually have heard. You can hear that sound in most of the counties in Colorado that border Nebraska and Kansas. You can hear it in select other counties farther west if you get lucky. So Andy got a grant to do to try to monitor cuckoos up on the Upper Missouri River in Montana, an area called the Upper Missouri Breaks. And it's a very remote area. And so instead of trying to hire field techs to actually walk into these sites 4 or 5 times over the course of the summer and do surveys, he figured it would be cheaper to purchase some of these automatic recording units, like this little green box that you see here in this photo. You can just attach them to a tree, and you can come back and pick them up months later and get all the recordings, and then you analyze the recordings during the wintertime when you don't have anything else to do as a field biologist. This is cheaper than hiring actual people, and in some cases it can be more accurate. But automatic recording units have an Achilles heel, which is that they have limited battery life and limited memory. You can't just put one out there and expect it to record 24/7 all summer long. It's going to run out of battery. It's going to run out of memory. So what Andy did instead is he programmed his units to only record for a few hours during the peak dawn chorus every day. And he recorded his, programmed his units to record from 5 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock a.m. And then they would turn off and save battery and save memory until 5 o'clock the next morning. That way he could get recordings all summer long. And all he would have to do is hike into these very remote locations once in April, and then come back and retrieve them all in August. This was the best use of his limited time and limited manpower. After he had purchased all these units, programmed them, and hiked way back into the backcountry and attached them to trees all up and down the Missouri Breaks, he realized he had made a critical mistake. He realized that the clocks, the internal clock on all of these units was not set to Mountain Daylight Time. It was set to Greenwich Mean Time, London time. So when he had programmed it to start at 5 o'clock in the morning and end at 9 o'clock in the morning, he had actually programmed it to start at about 11 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time and end about 5 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So all he was getting were recordings in the middle of the night. And by that time that he realized this, there was no way he could get one of his field techs out there to retrieve them all and reprogram them. He didn't have the time. He didn't have the manpower. He just said, oh, well, I screwed up. I wasted an entire field season and an entire batch of grant money, but what the heck? He went back out in August, retrieved all the units, and thought, I'll just look at the recordings and see what I've got. And to his surprise, he discovered that black-billed and yellow-billed cuckoos actually vocalize more in the middle of the night than they do between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. And in fact, they are more likely to be detected at night because they're almost the only birds singing. And so you don't have to deal with all of the background noise. It actually makes it faster for you to go through all the recordings and look for the cuckoos because you don't have to filter out 25 other species. And so he actually made a huge discovery about bird sounds that nobody actually knew before, a better way to survey for those two species that happened completely by accident, because nobody was getting up in the middle of the night and going out to survey cuckoos. So they never realized that cuckoos sing more during the middle of the night than they do early in the morning. So on that same theme, I also heard another story about a trouble with field monitoring, this time in the Adirondacks. When I was out there giving a talk in New York, I heard a story about people who were sent into the Adirondacks on volunteer missions to do monitoring for a bird that sings a very beautiful song. Here's the song that they were listening for. This is a song you probably have not heard in Colorado. That bird does not appear on the Colorado state list. It's never been seen or recorded in Colorado. It is a Bicknell's thrush. Even the relative of Bicknell's thrush, the gray-cheeked thrush, is quite rare here. And the story that I heard from the Bicknell's thrush researchers is that they would get volunteers, and the volunteers would hike up to these sites high up on the peaks of the Adirondacks near tree line, because that's where this bird breeds, near tree line, generally not close to any roads. So to do surveys, you have to hike way back up there in the backcountry, and you have to go super early in the morning because these birds sing really early in the morning. And then you listen for a few hours and you record how many Bicknell's thrush you hear, and then you come back down. And they kept hearing stories from their volunteers out in the field. One of the stories was, I didn't hear any Bicknell's thrush. They're supposed to be at this site, but I cannot hear them at all because I'm getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm hiking for 2 hours. I'm getting up there at 4, and then I was there on time, but I didn't hear anything. And then some other people didn't want to hike in the middle of the night, so they went up the night before. And when they went up the night before and camped out, they would hear Bicknell's thrush at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, singing right over their campsites. 4 o'clock in the morning, they'd get up, they'd start doing their early morning surveys, no more singing. 4 o'clock in the morning was too late for Bicknell's thrush. That's the middle of their day. They're already off doing their feeding or whatever. Their dawn chorus is over. And so the surveys for Bicknell's thrush were coming in abnormally low because nobody knew that this bird sings in the middle of the night also. What else sings in the middle of the night? This would be a good question. Maybe you should be out at midnight. Maybe you should schedule your next birding excursion for midnight and see what's singing out there. On this same thing, the same theme, I will tell you the case of the invisible bird. This happened right here in Colorado. I was going out to record a bird species that has a reputation for being very, very difficult to find, very difficult to see, and extremely difficult to audio record. And that is the black swift. And I was hiking up in Rocky Mountain National Park to Loch Vale, a place above Loch Vale where the swifts nest in a cave that has water coming down inside the cave. I was hoping to get audio recordings. This was several years ago, back before there were very many audio recordings of black swifts available. And so I was hiking up there at about 3:30 in the morning, past Loch Vale in Rocky Mountain National Park. It was a beautiful summer night, completely star-studded sky, completely dark, no hint of any sun yet in the horizon. And I started to hear this bird singing or calling from way up in the sky above me. Wherever it was, I was pointing my microphone at it and it kept moving. It was flying. It was doing big, huge circling loops above me in the sky when it was still completely fully, and it sounded like this. I was very excited at first because I thought this might be the black swifts, because they come off their night roost in the middle of the night. Sometimes they circle in the sky above you and they call. But as I was listening and listening, I was like, that doesn't sound like black swifts. That actually sounds like a violet green swallow. And that's exactly what it was. That you just heard was the dawn song of the violet green swallow. Super common bird here in Colorado. You may not have heard their dawn song before because you probably weren't up early enough, because they typically sing it circling against a backdrop of stars high above the forest at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then by the time it starts to get light in Colorado, they've quit singing. And you don't get to hear those amazing sounds from them anymore. This is another one that your best chance at hearing it is to go and camp out. Go camping, sleep in a place where there's violet green swallows at some campground up in the mountains, and set your alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning in June, maybe early July, and you have a good chance of hearing the dawn song of violet green swallow. I want to talk about one species of owl, because owls too, of course, sing in the middle of the night. And that is what you expect from owls. So it's not too strange if you haven't heard an owl because it was singing in the middle of the night, but there's one owl that almost nobody gets to hear the song of. If you go to the commercial bird sound recordings and listen to songs of owls, there are some songs that you hear all the time. You hear the hoo, 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 hoo of great horned owl. You can hear that constantly, anytime near dawn or dusk, anywhere in Colorado. Screech owls, you'll hear singing. Flammulated owls, you'll hear singing. Maybe some of you have even heard burrowing owls singing. They give a nasal two-noted beep, beep, which sounds most un-owl-like. But you can hear that if you're out around burrowing owl colonies in the middle of, well, usually around dawn or dusk is where you hear it, when you hear it the most, in May or June. But as I was writing my field guide to bird sounds, I realized there's one owl that sings a hooting song that almost nobody had any recordings of. Not because it's a rare bird, but just because it's rarely heard. And that is the short-eared owl. And in fact, I actually was lucky enough earlier this spring to hear the hooting sound of this hooting song of the short-eared owl for the very first time myself. I was on a road trip in early to mid-May through southwest South Dakota. And I stopped and camped on the national grassland right in the southwest corner of the state. So from Colorado, this is not very far. It's only about 4.5 hours from Denver. up to the spot in southwesternmost South Dakota where I was camping on the national grassland. Beautiful prairie. The Black Hills were off in the distance. And as I drove in at dusk, there were 2 or 3, maybe 4 pairs of short-eared owls flying over the grassland. And they were displaying, which is something that you almost never get to hear or see. And they were singing at dusk before it got dark, but there was a little bit too much road noise. I camped out. I set my alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning. And I got up and it was butt cold. I mean, it was probably, it was definitely below zero, but below freezing, I should say. It wasn't below zero. It was probably 20, 25 degrees when I got out there. Again, early May on the prairie at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the birds were still displaying and still singing, but the road noise was gone because the cars had quit. They were still pretty far away. So this is not a great recording that I'm going to play for you, but I'm going to play for you the recording that I made. You'll hear the hooting song of the short-eared owl once at the beginning, once at the end. And in the middle, I want you to listen for the wing clap display of the short-eared owl, which you'll hear once in the middle. It's not very loud. But here you see an illustration from my book of a short-eared owl giving its wing clap display. It does it on the wing, it sings on the wing, and then in between its hooting songs, it claps its wings 6 or 8 times really fast together below its body while it's in the air, creating a sound like, and then it'll hoot again after a few seconds. This is what it sounds like. Hopefully you were able to hear the hooting song there. It depends on how good your laptop speakers are, because laptop speakers don't always do a great job of transmitting low pitch sounds. But the hooting song, if you heard it, it sounds like kind of like a boreal owl if you slowed it down, made it deeper and slower. That's what the short-eared owl sings like. And then right in the middle there, kind of faintly, there was this, which is the wing clapping display. And I actually have here a video for you that was taken by my friend Bryce Robinson. And it's a short-eared owl flying in the daytime, and you can't hear the song and you can't hear the wing beats, but you can see them. So watch this bird fly. And after about 10 wing beats, this bird will do that wing clapping display, and watch how it does that. It's quite amazing. Did you see it? It starts flapping so many times that it misses a few wing beats and it starts to fall out of the sky. And it falls maybe 10 or 15 feet and then catches itself because it's too busy clapping its wings together below its body to actually fly. I'll show it to you again. It's very quick and very amazing. And so this is one of the things I want to say about bird sounds, is that not all bird songs, territorial, courtship kind of songs, not all of them are made with the bird's voice. Sometimes they can be made with the wings. Sometimes they can be made with the tail. Sometimes they can be made in other ways. And so what you've got here is you've got 2 basically different song sounds, 2 different display sounds from this common species, short-eared owl. A few of them even breed in Colorado, if you want to hear them singing, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go out to the prairie in early May, and you might be lucky enough to hear the hoo, 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 and or maybe you can even see them doing it before it gets dark or after it gets light. I see a question in the, I see a couple questions in the Q&A that we haven't addressed. I see from Allison, is light pollution the cause of confusion in many of our common birds like northern mockingbird or American robin to sing at night? That's an interesting question. I think there could be some confusion on the part of some birds that might start singing a little earlier than they normally would because of light pollution. However, it's at least in northern mockingbirds, the conventional wisdom is that the night singing birds are the ones that are unpaired. They're the desperate males who haven't yet found a mate, and they're so worked up about it that they just keep going all night long. I've not heard that same thing for American robins, so it's possible that American robins are sometimes confused by light pollution if they're singing at night. But what you might consider night, they might consider early morning. So if it's 3 o'clock in the morning in May and an American robin is dawn singing, it's just gotten an early start on the day is all that it's done. And if you just listen to that bird, it'll keep going all the way through till 5. And that's just, I think, usually the breeding excitement that we get there. I see Linda asking, did you know to expect the display noise of the short-eared owl? I knew what the display noises of the short-eared owl sounded like because I had heard recordings of them. And I had seen once up in South Dakota, in another part of South Dakota during the day, I had seen this wing clapping display, but couldn't hear it because the birds were too far away. So this was the first time last May that I had actually heard these sounds, but I knew exactly what they were because I had heard them on other people's recordings. It was very exciting for me to hear them myself. And then the anonymous attendee asks, are they clapping their wings at the tip? That is exactly what they're doing. And just because I can, I'm gonna play the video one more time. Watch the bird clap its wings about 10 times right now. And it can't do that and fly too at the same time. So it actually drops a little bit out of the sky and then has to catch itself, which is really amazing and fantastic. All right. Let's start with another sound. I'm just curious. I'm going to play you a haunting double whistle. One of my favorite bird sounds. When I heard this for the first time, it was in a recording. Somebody else was recording, and it was not of this species. This was in the background of some other bird, and I was listening to it, and I thought, what is that? I've never heard anything like that. What could that possibly be? I'm going to play it, and if you know for sure what it is, I'm going to ask you not to type anything in the Q&A. But if you have a guess as to what it might be, and maybe your guess is just a type of bird. Maybe you think it might be an owl. Maybe you think it might be a woodpecker. Maybe you think it might be a chickadee. I'm just curious to see what people are going to guess if you hear this for the first time here. If you have a guess as to what kind of bird that might be, even what family of bird that might be, go ahead and put it in the Q&A for us. I'm just curious what you might think that was. I apologize for the kind of poor quality of the recording. This is my only recording of this species. I've only heard it with my own ears once. This is a bird that you can see in Colorado, although it's kind of rare. but it's one of those that you're almost never going to hear in Colorado because you're not near the breeding grounds for this bird. I'm seeing a guess of hawk. I'm seeing a guess of grouse. What else have we got? I'll play it one more time while we're waiting for some other brave people to venture. Oops, there's the bird. Let me play it again here. Yeah, so I ruined the surprise by accidentally forwarding to this slide. This is the song of the black scoter. And if you're near the sea coast, especially the East Coast, where the black scoters breed, you can hear this song. It's very distinctive. All the birds in Massachusetts would know this trivia question instantly. They hear this all the time. Black scoters sing frequently when they're near their breeding grounds. But here in Colorado, we think of them as little black dots out on a lake that don't make any sound at all. They just dive and then they come back up, and they dive and they come back up. And you would never know that this bird has such a haunting song, especially if you think that ducks quack. Many ducks quack, but some ducks do something entirely different. Which brings me to the double life of a sandpiper. You're probably used to thinking of sandpipers as these kind of boring little brown and white little birds that sit on the mudflats and poke their beaks into the mud. And when they fly away, they make calls like this. And that's kind of all they do. And they're not super exciting from a sound perspective. They're mostly exciting for people who really enjoy identifying hard to identify little brown birds. But let me tell you that the sandpipers we get here in Colorado, although they are the same species, they are entirely different birds from those same species up on the Arctic breeding grounds. Most species of sandpipers have extremely long and complicated songs that they sing. Many of them have more than one kind of song. Many of them will sit up on top of trees and sing. They'll broadcast like robins over their territory from the top of taiga trees. Some of them will give these crazy flight displays like long spurs. They'll chase each other through the air. They're extremely vocal, extremely interesting on the breeding grounds. And this particular species that you're looking at right here has probably the wackiest song of all. This is a pectoral sandpiper. And what you just heard was the calls of the pectoral sandpiper, just those brr, brr, brr calls that they give when they're flying away from you out at Pruitt Reservoir in the fall or in the spring. Well, if you go up to the breeding grounds, if you go up to the Alaskan tundra where pectoral sandpipers breed, you might see them fluffing out the inflatable sacs in their chest like sage grouse, and then flying across the tundra, making their amazing owl-like hooting songs. Here's what the song of the pectoral sandpiper sounds like. And what you can see there, you can see how strangely distended the belly of that bird is in flight. That's a pectoral sandpiper with its neck sacs fully inflated, doing its flight display, giving that hooting song over the Alaskan tundra. It is one of the most unsandpiper-like sounds in the entire sandpiper family, and one of the most unexpected sounds from any North American bird. You could live your entire life looking at every pectoral sandpiper in Colorado and never hear that sound, never see this breeding display. But it's a familiar bird to many of us here in Colorado, and it has this completely other life up on the tundra and a completely other set of songs that it sings up there. My seventh story is about the siren song of the cattails. And when I say siren song, I don't mean siren as in mermaid. I'm not talking about beautiful songs that lure birders deeper into the marsh to their doom. I mean siren as in air raid, as in what happens when you are being bombed from above by some kind of enemy aircraft. You set up the air raid sirens. A lot of birds might just make alarm calls when a hawk flies over their territory. But this bird, which is a common bird that you've all heard a million times here in Colorado, common breeder in many parts of the state, this bird has a particularly complex song that it gives in that situation. In fact, in the old literature, this is called the hawk song. But this is not given by a hawk, it's given to a hawk. It's given at a hawk. When a hawk flies over, this particular bird gives an entirely different kind of song than it normally gives, apparently in order to scare the hawk away. And in fact, they will sometimes, groups of them will sometimes mob the hawks and all give this same song. I'm going to play it for you here. Just curious if anybody wants to type some guesses in the Q&A. What kind of species do you think that might be? Maybe you've heard this. You've probably all heard it. Maybe you've heard it and connected it to the bird that makes it. Or maybe you haven't. What guesses have we got? I've got one guess of red-winged blackbird. Anybody else brave enough to give it a shot? Oh, somebody didn't hear it because the signal went out and somebody's guessing Sora. I'm gonna play it. I'll try to play it one more time here. I'm seeing guesses of red-winged blackbird, Sora, cowbird. Several of you are in the right vicinity. You're in the right family. The actual species is yellow-headed blackbird. What you just heard is the hawk song of the yellow-headed blackbird. You're probably familiar with their normal song, which sounds like a cat being strangled. And that's what they give when they want to impress the females. But when they want to drive away a hawk, they have this much longer and more complex song that they rise from the cattails, often as a group, in order to drive away the harrier or the red-tailed hawk that is swooping low over the marsh. You'll also see them doing it to herons and bitterns and any other large bird that could possibly be a hawk. They'll often use this song to drive other large birds out of their territory. And yes, I'm seeing questions like the signal's going out. Was it just a few notes at the beginning or was there more? There was more. That was probably a good 30 seconds of song that you should have been hearing continuously there. So if the sound is not working perfectly well, that's an issue. Let me see if I can stop us real quick and start again. I'm going to try playing that one more time, and I'm just curious to see if people hear the entire song, just so we can make sure that the sound is working correctly. I'm going to raise my hand the entire time that the song is playing, and I'll put my hand down when it stops playing on my machine. And just if you're having issues hearing that whole song, let me know in the Q&A, and we'll see what we can do about that.
That seemed to fix it, Nathan.
All right. I think I forgot to click the little secret button about the sound sharing at the start of this recording. So hopefully the audio will be better from now on. Sorry, I didn't do that earlier. And I got the sound working just in time for it not to matter, because we're going to talk about non-audio sounds next up. We're going to talk right here about the dance of the cormorants. I'm going to show you a species of cormorant that I got to know out in California. This is a Brandt's cormorant here. And Brandt's cormorants, if you look at them in the field guide, like in the Sibley guide, when they're illustrated, they've got this kind of buffy throat patch. And then all the field guides show this blue patch in front of the buffy patch. And when I went to California, I could never really see that. I was always staring through the binoculars, through the scope at these cormorants, and they just looked black on the face. And so I was kind of a little bit not sure if they were Brandt's or not, because I couldn't see that blue I was expecting to see from the field guides. Well, they hardly ever show that blue. But once in a while, if you go to their breeding grounds and you get to watch them actually at a colony doing their courtship kind of stuff, they will surprise you. Now, there was no sound on that clip. And when the bird does what it just did, when the Brandt's cormorant does this display, it does not actually make any sound. This is, you could consider this a visual song. Cormorants are not known for making a lot of sounds. Cormorants have a lot of kind of grunting sounds that they make. And they live on rocky seacoasts with lots of surf noise and gull noise. So the way that they get each other's attention is with these visual displays. And a flash of blue, a flash of iridescent blue, can also be a form of song. It can also be a bright note shining out and giving a signal to all the other cormorants on the rock. Here's another song of the Brandt's cormorant. Again, no sound. This is just one of their visual songs that they do. They don't sing, but they have these contortionist positions that they make while puffing out their iridescent blue throats. And this is a clear signal that they're sending to all the other Brandt's cormorants. I'm on a nest. I'm available. I'm looking for a mate. Come join me. Here's one of my favorites tonight. Some birds are really amazing at singing. They have incredible voices that you may not have heard or appreciated before. I'm going to play you this song, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to act like a panel of Olympic judges, like at the figure skating competition. Your job is to give this bird a singing score on a scale from 0 to 10, and you can give points. You know, you can say 9.5 or whatever. If you want to put in comments, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to play this bird for you, and I'm just going to ask you to give it an Olympic score. Hold up your placard by typing your number in the Q&A. Here's what it sounds like. So I'm going to play it again. And while I'm playing it again, go ahead and type your Olympic score into the chat. I love the scores that I am seeing. I love seeing all these 7s and 8s and 9s. Of course, not everybody is equally impressed. We've only got, Luke's only given it a 6 out of 10, but most people here are giving it 8.8, 8.9, 7.7. And there's some people who really liked it, 9.6, 9.8. Nobody's given it a perfect 10 here. Now, I'm going to play this song for you again, this time at normal speed. I just played it for you at 40% of normal speed. I played it for you slowed down. Now I'm going to play it for you the way you would normally hear it in real life. And if you don't recognize it, it is, of course, a house sparrow singing to you in your driveway. Here are the first 7 spectrograms of the first 7 chirping sounds in that song. So take a look at how intricate those are. Take a look at how complex they are. You cannot appreciate all of the intricacy and the complexity just by listening at normal speed with your boring human ears. If you have a practiced eye, you can see that in several places, we clearly have polyphonic sounds here. We clearly have the bird singing with both of its voices, a different note from each lung. And if you go through carefully through this entire song, you'll see that it's not random, it's not haphazard. These are song phrases. They're being repeated at regular intervals with exact precision. So this exact chirp in the middle here is going to be repeated later in all of its fine detail, many, many times. This is a song. This is a very complex, very beautiful song, but you probably don't think of it that way because you're used to thinking of house sparrows as just birds that give boring old chirps. So take a look at these 7 shapes. I'm going to play the song again, first at normal speed, and it'll go more than 7 chirps. It'll go the whole song. But listen to the first 7 chirps and try to follow along and see if you can match the chirp to the shape as I'm playing it at normal speed. Then we'll do it again at 40% speed. Here it is at normal speed. And here it is, the first 7 phrases of that song at 40% speed again. Again, watch the shapes and see if you can match the shape to the sound. This is a wonderful, wonderful sound that I hope to increase your appreciation of. I'll just go back real quick so you can also appreciate the really amazing beauty of a house sparrow, its plumage, its fine combination of grays and blacks and chestnut browns. It's a seriously underappreciated bird. And this is an interesting photo because I don't know if you noticed the Eurasian tree sparrow blurry in the background there, but this photo is from Poland. So it's got an extra species in there. And I see a question from Marty in the Q&A. Are all these songs and calls to be discovered and ID'd by using your field guides to bird songs, or are some of them new since publishing? The vast majority of them are covered in my field guide to bird songs. There will be, I think, one here that I'll talk about that's not covered in the field guide, and we haven't gotten to it yet. But everything else we've talked about so far is in the guide, and most of everything that we've talked about is in the guide. Here's a bird that posed a huge mystery to many people. And I still occasionally get people from Colorado writing to me and saying, I heard this crazy weird bird up in the mountains. And they describe the sound, and I say, I think I know what that is. This is another sound that, although the species is common, the sound seems to be rare. You wouldn't think it should be rare, but it is rare. I've never heard it knowingly with my own ears, although I'm aware of a number of recordings of it. And it is a really crazy sound. You're most likely hear it up in pine forest in Colorado or other places in the West at this time of year, and it sounds like this. If you're not super familiar with the structure of the sounds, that's like this 3-note rising pattern, which is pretty complicated for just being a call. And if you listen carefully or look at it on the spectrogram, you can tell that this bird is using both sides of its syrinx. It's singing a polyphonic sound. I'm now going to show you a photo of the bird, the kind of bird that makes this sound. And I would like to see the answers pop up in the chat, or in the Q&A, I should say. If you're lucky enough to hear this bird in the sound in Colorado, it's going to be coming from a bird that looks like that. What is that? And I am seeing the correct answer popping up in the chat. This is a Townsend's solitaire. This is a juvenile Townsend solitaire giving begging calls. This is what a begging juvenile Townsend solitaire sounds like when it is begging for food. And it is just the craziest sound ever. And there are very few recordings of this, very few good recordings of this. That recording that I just played for you was made by Chuck Aide, who many of you probably know, and it was made up here on the flanks of Mount Evans. And he sent this to me and said, I got this recording and it's crazy, and it was a begging solitaire, I think. And I came out the very next day with him to try to get more recordings, and we saw lots of solitaires, but we never saw a juvenile and we never heard this sound. So they're tough to track down when they are giving that sound. But it is probably the most amazing begging call I know of any juvenile bird. Interestingly, other species of solitaires, like the Andean solitaire down in South America, also has really cool juvenile begging calls. I see a question from Allison. Could you explain syrinx versus lung? If there's a difference, how does it affect sound? That is a very timely question, because we're about to talk about the bird without a voice, which is going to require us to talk about syrinxes a little bit. You and I, when we speak, we make sounds using an organ called the larynx. The larynx is up here in your throat. It's your vocal cords. It's how I'm talking to you right now. And birds do not have a larynx. Birds have a vocal organ that's much different. It's called a syrinx. It's located down in the chest at the wide junction, where the trachea splits into 2 bronchi, one to go to each lung. And the syrinx, although it's a single organ, it actually has 2 sound-producing membranes, one on the left, one in the right, one in each bronchus. In other words, every bird has 2 voices that are controlled by their 2 different lungs. So they can sing one note with their right lung and another note with their left lung. Basically, all birds have this ability, but a lot of birds never use it. What a lot of birds do is they sing their entire lives from one side of their syrinx and they never use the other side. What's even more common is for birds to sing all the high notes in their song with one side of their syrinx and the low notes in their song with another side of their syrinx. But some birds can sing with both sides of their syrinx at the same time, meaning they can actually duet with themselves and sing a chord, sing both the melody and the harmony. And that's what the house sparrow does, although it does it so fast that it just sounds like a chirp to your ears. And it's what thrushes do, which makes them sound all fluty and metallic. Finches, it's what that yellow-headed blackbird did, what bobolinks do that makes them sound like video game soundtracks. That's what buried thrushes do. Yes, whenever a bird is singing more than one note at the same time, whether it's dissonant or whether it's harmonic, that is a polyphonic sound, meaning that bird is singing with both of its voices at the same time. Two different notes that are mathematically unrelated, coming from two different membranes on either side of the body. And that brings us to the bird without a voice. I am doing something right now that no speaker, as far as I know, has ever done at a DFO meeting. I am showing you on the screen right this very moment the entire full text of a scientific peer-reviewed article. It was a very short note from 1957, was it? Yeah. And it's like 5 sentences long. And it says, dissection of the trachea of the turkey vulture shows no syrinx. The trachea branches into 2 bronchi, much as in mammals. There's no syringeal drum, no pecculus, no wide expanses of membrane, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about what's not there. Just look at the basic conclusion at the bottom there. The voiceless condition of the turkey vulture is due to structure and is not merely a matter of behavior. In other words, this researcher back in 1957 dissected some dead turkey vultures, found no muscles attaching to the syrinx, no membranes that can vibrate like in other birds to create sound, concluded that the hissing and the grunting of turkey vultures, it's all they can do because they don't really have the ability of other birds to control their voice. Here's what it says about black vulture in the Birds of North America account. It says, lacks a syrinx and associated musculature and can consequently make only a limited number of sounds. Interestingly, it then goes on to discuss a whole bunch of different kinds of sounds, from a short grunting sound like guff, 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 or like hogs feeding, a long drawn out hiss when disturbed, a hiss by the young, and then adults at the nest may give a creaking coo like that of a rock pigeon. Birds engaged in courtship displays may emit a yapping sound. If you're like me and you start reading farther and farther through these paragraphs, you start to think, well, if it doesn't have a syrinx, how can it make all these different kinds of sounds? Maybe black vultures actually have more going on than we realized. I was lucky enough years ago to videotape some black vultures at a kill, at a dead cow in Mississippi. And I was both pointing the camera at them and recording them at the same time. I'm going to play you a couple of video clips. What I realized over a morning of watching these vultures, and I apologize for the slight gore here, but mostly this cow was already, eaten. So there's a few bones and things they're picking over here at the end. Hopefully it's not too gross for you. But what I realized as I watched these black vultures for an entire morning is that they have an entire repertoire of both vocal sounds and visual displays, kind of like those cormorants. And so I'm going to play you this clip, and you're going to hear those hog-like grunts, or like those cuff, cuff, cuff sounds, which seemed to be made in aggression when these birds were like flapping their wings once at each other, trying to displace one another. You'll hear it several times. You mostly won't see the flapping displays. You'll see a few of them. They won't necessarily sync with the audio, but listen carefully to what this group of feeding vultures sounds like and what they're doing. It's not very loud. What I wanted you to hear was that woof, woof sound there on the audio. That woof, woof sound is the aggressive sound that these vultures make when they're just bluff charging one another. As I listened farther, I heard a couple more sounds. I'm going to play you a second video clip. And in the second clip, you'll hear this soft grunting, soft gabbling of the feeding birds, very much in the background the whole time. And then at a certain point, two birds are going to fight and they're going to make some really loud hisses. So there's three different kinds of sounds we've just heard from a bird that supposedly has no voice, according to the scientific literature. We've heard the huff, huff, huff of the aggressive sounds. We've heard the which are kind of like flock contentment sounds of the feeding flock. And then we've heard that really loud hissing when the birds really get upset with one another. That's not even all of the sounds that black vultures make. A few years ago in Mexico, I learned that when they're doing dive displays in midair, the wind through the wings of the black vulture makes a sound that sounds like kind of a careening automobile going around a curve or something like that. This is not the world's best recording, but here is what it sounds like. And that kind of sound is actually quite loud. You can actually hear it for about half a mile from these black vultures doing their flight displays. And it's made by the wind going through their primary feathers, made by the wings, not by the voice. And that is, I think, one of the primary courtship or aggressive sounds of the black vulture. And yet it doesn't really seem to have been described in the scientific literature. All of these sounds that I just gave to you for black vulture, I was not aware of any of this when I wrote the book, and so none of that is in the book for black vulture. So that's the new material for tonight. And that brings us to our very final bird song of the night. I call it the virtuoso close to home. I've saved in some ways the best for last. I'm going to play you the song of a common Colorado bird. And while you're listening to it, first of all, I want you to marvel at it and think how amazing this bird is. And then I want you to guess what it is in the Q&A. Here is what it sounds like. There was a mourning dove in the background. There was a white-breasted nuthatch in the background. Everything else was from one species, and it's a species you're familiar with here in Colorado. If you think you know what it was, go ahead and put that answer in there. I'm going to go here and play it for you one more time while more people put their guesses in the chat. I love all the guesses that we are getting here in the Q&A, and some of them are actually right, but most of them are not, because they're all over the map. I'm seeing everything from house wren to black chin, hummingbird, house finch at slow speed. The amazing thing about this song is that I just played it at 100% normal speed. You just heard it exactly the way this bird sings in Colorado. No tricks up my sleeve. And a couple people got it correct. It is not a gray catbird. It is not a starling. It is not a goldfinch. But several of you heard what sounded like pine siskin notes, because it is, you are hearing pine siskin notes, but they are being imitated. The pine siskin is being imitated by this bird. This is the song of the Steller's jay that you just heard. And kudos to Joanne and to Audrey for getting that right. Both of them. Good job, and good to see you both in here. I'll just play it one more time so you can marvel at this. This is what we call a whisper song. A lot of jays have whisper songs, including pinion jay, blue jay, Steller's jay. Clark's nutcracker will make some really crazy sounds, kind of like this. A lot of times they will imitate other birds. Magpies will do this. They'll often do it in late summer. They'll often do it very quietly when no other jays are around. Or sometimes they'll do it when there's a big flock of jays around. This was a solo bird that I recorded up near Lyons in the spring several years ago. Oh, Elena says, Merlin IDs it as Steller's jay. Good job, Merlin. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of my talk for tonight. And I think I've gone a little bit over time. So I will leave it to Bill to decide how many Q&A type questions we want to do, if any. I've answered a lot as we've been going. And thank you all for your attention tonight. I'm super glad that you were the guinea pigs for this first ever version of this talk. Bill, you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan. Always a wonderful program, and you certainly had invited the interaction of the audience, people responding to your asking them what to identify these various calls. And who would have thought about some of these things? Isn't it interesting what we're discovering, albeit by accident, in the case of the fellow that had expected the calls early in the morning and found them in the middle of the night with the cuckoos. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we still have quite an audience, and I think we have time for perhaps 3 or 4 more questions. Although, as you point out, we've been taking them right along. So anybody has additional questions, we have time for a couple more. If you want to type them into your Q&A section, Nathan would be glad to address them.
Let me just start by addressing a question that came up a few minutes ago in the series, and I skipped over it at the time, from my friend Ann Thompson, asking, is bird songs more inclusive than songbirds? So you'll notice that in the original title of this talk, it was the best bird songs you've never heard, and then I switched it to the best bird sounds you've never heard, because sounds is more inclusive than songs. Sounds is any kind of sound that a bird makes. Songs are a particular subset of bird sounds, and they're typically the ones that are given either to attract a mate or to defend a territory or both. And I hope I've kind of broadened your idea of song tonight by pointing out that songs don't have to be made by the voice. They could be made by the bill or the wings or the tail, maybe even sometimes by just visual display.